Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. As you'll notice, we have you all on mute, so you are welcome to put your camera on if you'd like to, but if not, you can turn your camera off and just listen. We will be doing a Q&A towards the end, so you can turn your your camera on for that, but we will be using the chat tonight, so feel free to use that to ask questions or let us know where you're joining from. My name's Colleen. I do the programming for The Battery, and I'm so glad to welcome you all tonight to Adjusting to the New Normal, Strategies for Children and Students. This panel came together as a result of something that we're all adjusting to, how we're kind of navigating this new virtual world, in particular, how we're navigating it with remote learning, as probably a lot of us are navigating it with remote work. So this is inevitably taking a toll on the lives of children and their families, combined with all of the impacts of school closures and the disruption of daily life. We tonight are going to talk about the impact on mental health and the new challenges to the learning experience that this is causing for families and parents to deal with. So we are joined by panelists from Child Mind Institute and Children's Health Council, who will provide extensive resources and tools to support you all. May you be parents, or may you just be curious on how to do this. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight, Dave Anderson. He's the Senior Director of National Programs and Outreach at Child Mind Institute, and he specializes in evaluating and treating children and adolescents with ADHD and behavior disorders. He's devoted to ensuring that patients receive innovative and cutting-edge care tailored to each family's specific needs. So Dave, I'll pass it over to you and have you introduce our other panelists tonight.
Great, thank you, Colleen. And thank you all for being here. I know we'll likely see our numbers swell because COVID attendance tends to roll in a few minutes late just because, it's Zoom and we're all just kind of jumping from digital room to digital room. So yes, as Colleen said, I'm Senior Director of National Programs at the Child Mind Institute. I'm also a clinical psychologist. The patients that I treat tend to be kiddos either with ADHD or behavioral difficulties, or they might be on the autism spectrum. And I do a lot of work with kids, parents, and in school settings. I also run the Child Mind Institute school and community programs, which means that I oversee a department of about 27 of our employees, about 20 clinicians, all of whom work in about 120 schools in New York and about 20 schools in the Bay Area in any given year. And those programs have served about 45,000 students, parents, and educators over the last half decade. So, a lot of the stuff that I like to speak to is school focused and behavior focused. At the same time, just on a personal note, I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old and a wonderful partner, Dylan. She is currently with our 1-year-old. I was just sharing with the group that already tonight I'm engaging in some COVID coping because my 1-year-old pooped in the bath about 30 minutes ago and I've already cleaned that up and I'm smelling bleach. And at the same time, my 4-year-old's currently outside the door watching truck videos until my wife is ready to put him to bed. So, we're all flexible and trying to make this work here. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Vidya, do you want to go first and introduce a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. Hi, I'm Vidya Krishnan. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm currently the head of adolescent mental health services at the Children's Health Council, besides being the supervising psychiatrist at the RISE IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program for kids with severe mental health needs. I also am a clinical assistant professor affiliated at Stanford, where I help in the training of child and adolescent psychiatry fellows as they come through. As Dave already mentioned, I work for the Children's Health Council, which is a Bay Area institution, I would say, for 70 years, providing educational and mental health resources in that particular field. Like everybody else with the pandemic, we have jumped over to the telehealth arena where we provide most of our services at this point remotely, just for the safety and well-being of all. But of interest to this group might be that in addition to our health services, we also offer a lot of parent support groups, community education resources. We have a large resource library with our previous talks and other resources available at your fingertips. And if you have concerns about your children, we also do offer 30-minute free consultation services, which allow you to just talk to a clinician, just to talk about what's going on so that they can point you with personalized resources to help you navigate next steps. And I guess I'll ask Andrea wants to jump in.
Thank you, Vidya. Yes, my name is Andrea Pascarelli. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm with the Child Mind Institute along with Dave. I'm located in our Bay Area office. So we have a location in San Mateo. I work in the Anxiety Center, and meaning I work mostly with children, families, and teenagers with varying conditions of anxiety and stress, which there's a lot of right now. We provide individual therapy. We do quite a bit of groups right now, even telehealth, as well as neuropsychological evaluations. We pivoted really quick to telehealth services. I was a bit of a naysayer right before all this of telehealth, and now have come to love it and cannot believe how great it is, even for little kids all the way up to older ones. So we opened up our Bay Area office I should say, in September 2019. So we only had, 6 months maybe of in-office stuff. And then now we're telehealth. Our New York office, of course, where Dave is, has been open since 2009. So I would encourage folks to go to our website because we have a ton of resources and information, and as well as a whole section on COVID-19 and all the factors. So happy to be here tonight. So thank you for having us.
And just to give you all a sense of how much our work is interwoven, we collaborate with a number of Vidya's colleagues at CHC and the Ravenswood Wellness Partnership, focused on services for the most underserved districts and areas of the Bay. And then at the same time, I believe that the Battery's charitable arm has also funded that work collaboratively for both CHC and CMI in serving various school districts across the Bay Area. So we're all kind of connected. The other connection we were going to have tonight was Paul Keyes, who is the executive director of Teach for America Bay Area. Unfortunately, Paul has been going back and forth with us since this morning. He was kind of feeling under the weather, and he was saying that he doesn't feel that he is at a point where he can string enough thoughts together to make this coherent tonight. So unfortunately, he had to kind of bow out. So what you've got is a clinical super team here. You were hearing across all the different specialties. You have psychiatry, anxiety, behavior. What I will say is we're going to continue to have a panel discussion for about the next 30 minutes. On around 5:40 or 5:45, we're going to stop for questions depending on how many questions you throw into the chat. So, we'll keep talking, but if you overload us with all kinds of questions about mental health concerns during the pandemic, either yours, your children's, your families, your partners, your friends, anything like that, we'll just stop early and start answering some of those questions. So please feel free to put everything in the chat. With that, just a couple questions. So Andrea, you actually previewed the first question I was going to start with on the panel tonight, which is just, how has your work evolved during the pandemic? How is it different?
Yeah, and I'll jump in with that. What I would say is, we started building our practice in the Bay in September. So we were really getting into the community, collaborating with our various colleagues, and building our work here, and we're super excited to be here. The pandemic struck. None of us planned for this. And I think we made a very quick change of plans. And I think March 13th was the first day. I think March 12th was the last day I was in the office. March 13th, I was at home doing telehealth. So, and as I kind of indicated before, I never expected to do that. And I think, I'm constantly reminding myself of how lucky we are to have telehealth services. We transitioned our full caseloads over to individual therapy over telehealth. We quickly started various groups that are also being run out of our New York office. We have a whole neuropsychology team who somehow quickly adapted and learned how to do evidence-based, really valid neuropsych assessments remotely. I think it was over the summer that we were able to kind of sometimes get back into the office and do some in-person stuff again. But I have to say, overall, transitioning to telehealth went far better than I expected. And I'm still kind of astounded that even doing it with younger kids, doing real evidence-based therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, treating, 5 and 6 year olds with anxiety, all the way up to students that were maybe home from college now that the pandemic struck.
And Andrea, what do you do with these kids in a telehealth session? I mean, we're talking about the pivot, and this good thing is because you're talking about young kids, so I can pivot to Vidya talking about adolescents. But what do you do in a telehealth session with a 7-year-old?
Yeah, in many ways, not much different than we would in the office. So parents are a big part of this, especially with younger kids. But we do, for example, with a lot of the young kids I work with, we're doing cognitive behavioral therapy. So we might be using a manualized workbook, different worksheets, which thanks to screen sharing, which I feel like I'm finally getting good at, screen sharing and making it interactive, sending them information in advance, helping them learn skills. I think one particular tool we've developed is, in the office, we would engage in some kind of rewarding activity with the kids at the end, like a board game or art, and getting good at now doing this over, on telehealth and with different websites. And kids are remarkably adaptive, probably better than us adults who are just more rigid and set in our ways of doing things. So I think I get energy from them and trying this new game together. And they'll try to screen share with me, and it's gone really well. I would say transitioning from the kids I saw in person to remote, and then now I have a handful of kids I've never actually met in person, and our relationship is as strong as I think any other relationship is. So it's exciting. It's an exciting and a positive thing that's come from this.
It's a rare thing to be able to kind of highlight any sort of silver lining in the midst of all of this, because I'm sure we'll get to some of the things that are less so tonight.
Yes.
But Vidya, because you run the adolescent health division of CHC, what are you seeing about how care's evolved for teenagers? And I know you also run the IOP too, so I assume like this is super intense. But yeah.
Yeah, no, similar to what Andrea said. It was pretty much over a weekend. I think the 13th was the last day for us in office, and the 16th was our first day out there. But I think what is valuable is we actually have had a telehealth presence for a while. So for us, this was not new at all, because we were seeing a contingent of our kids over telehealth even before. It just switched everybody over to telehealth. So we had all the infrastructure in place, which actually made the switch super easy. So we were able to just basically send Zoom links over the weekend to everybody and converted all our in-person sessions to remote sessions. It was as simple as that, because all of us already had Zoom accounts. And so it was actually very, very seamlessly done. But what has been interesting for me is not only that, over the weekend, the entire IOP team made a plan, and we delivered intensive outpatient services, which include parent groups, child groups, individual DBT therapy, all started Monday morning, March the 16th, remotely as well. We had the entire thing switch over, because for the week before, we'd already been planning, because we knew, for a week or two, we knew this was coming. So we had actually had an entire blueprint ready, so we didn't miss a beat at all. And the other thing is, in addition, we also have been delivering occupational therapy services, and even children as young as 3 years of age, we are seeing remotely for PCIT and other things, and using the parents and other resources to kind of make that work. So we have transitioned all our services remote. And we also have, for the people who are joining in, we have 2 schools on site, one of which is a therapeutic school for behaviorally challenged children. The other is for kids with learning differences who have found innovative methodologies to do remote learning possible. And actually, they've both, for the last month, been in person because we got waivers from the government.
For those of you unaware, the abbreviations we're using in an IOP is an intensive outpatient program, which to pivot something like that to telehealth is a gargantuan and impressive feat, given just how much it takes. I mean, I've visited in that internal courtyard within CHC and seen, just how intense the program is. To pivot that to telehealth is really amazing. And, I think you highlight something else related to the pandemic and pivoting, which is also related to my client population, which is so much of my work has been parent coaching. Because when you work with behavior, particularly with younger kids, you actually hardly get to know the kid. And the reason is because as much as I got into therapy because I thought that I was going to be able to connect with kids and adolescents really well in therapy, my particular specialization means that I spend most of my time with parents, which I love. Let me get that clear. It's just you don't envision it going forward. But these are things where prior to the pandemic, even the week before, I was doing coaching sessions. We were visiting diners together and coaching through meal times or going clothing shopping or going to the park. And all of a sudden, it became dropping a video camera in one place while we've got a Bluetooth in a parent's ear in another place, and we're coaching through those kind of digital means through behavior, which, to Andrea's earlier point, actually is something I intend to keep following the pandemic. So, and Vidya, your point that you all were already ahead of the game on telehealth, so you're merely just kind of keeping much of the same. I really think that for a lot of us, the plan is to keep telehealth. We at CMI, you know, when we opened our office in San Mateo, one of the questions we had was, you know, just how much of the Bay Area was going to have access to us, because as you know, the geography is so predictive of your patient population. And our plan is to kind of, you know, while we're located in San Mateo, if we've got patients in Marin and we can depend on telehealth and make it so they don't have to travel all the way down to the office, you know, a lot, that's going to be really helpful, and maybe something that we keep for as, you know, as long as it can be effective. To Andrea's earlier point too, for those of you watching, the telehealth research before the pandemic was actually pretty good, showing that people with moderate symptomatology actually benefit from telehealth at about the same level they benefit from in-person therapy. The reason why I'm harping on how Vidya is so impressive with the pivot with the IOP is that patients who have more severe symptomatology, that's where telehealth really doesn't have a demonstrated record of effectiveness. So if you can pivot an intensive program, that's you know, really impressive. So going on to kind of other questions, just in terms of some of the things that we've seen with, you know, I know for a lot of us, so much of the support that we provide is related to the intersection of a family and school. What kinds of challenges are you seeing in your patients in online learning, since in particular in California, there's never even been a day of in-person learning during the pandemic? So go for that.
So I'll add in too. Dave mentioned in the beginning, I forgot to mention I have 2 children as well. I don't know how I could forget, because we've been doing remote schooling since March 16th. And you know, it's hard on a good day. So I think what I'm hearing from my patients, I mean, because I'm doing it myself, and being a teacher where I didn't ever want to be or plan to be and not have that relationship with my kids, it's really tricky. And so I think I have a ton of empathy for parents just juggling it all, and we're having to stretch and be flexible in areas where you know, we never thought to be. I think the thing where I hear the most successes are still really good collaborations with teachers and parents. And I think that's such a core foundation for success. I think kids, in many ways, they're adaptable. They will, in most occasions, rise to the challenge and get used to the new schedule. But we have to figure out how we're all managing and working together to build that for them. I think since March, I was seeing, you know, especially with my older adolescents, like a lot of grief and loss, disappointment. Let's just get through that school year. Okay, because by the fall, surely we'll be up and running. You know, a lot of hope around that. And then summer was different. And then, you know, transitioning. You know, we did have, Dave, too, about, I guess it was maybe around 6 weeks ago, I started hearing some private schools in the broader Bay Area were opening up. In very, you know, small, specific ways, and doing it quite well. Now, last week, we're back in, I think our color is purple now. So we're back in the most restrictive with curfews and things like that. So I'm not sure what this means for schools staying opening. But I'm constantly in awe with just the modifications and the transitions that our kids are making.
I would agree with everything Andrea said, but the main thing I would add, I think, comes back to knowing your child, right? You know your child in ways that other people don't, and you know what will work and what won't. Even if you've never structured a school program for your child, you know their learning style, you know what frustrates them, what engages them, what incentives work for them. And I think that is because even though there is so many frustrations and disappointments that come from all the things you cannot control, I think the thing I would tell to parents is start with what you do know. You know your child, that's who you're partnering with, that's who you're working with. Then you add in these other things. And then what you do is you think of what school actually provides, right? Yes, school provides learning, but more than learning, it provides structure and peers. And I think that is the container in which kids are there, which allows them to go in lockstep and do what that needs to do. Obviously, you're not a peer and you can't be there all the time to provide the structure. But if you think critically to think what could be substitutes for those two things, that goes a long way towards figuring out what would work as we transition. As also Andrea correctly mentioned, we keep looking at this road down and think, the turn is here, and it'll be done in another week or 2 weeks. But it just is like it's like a mirage where so I think if we do not get defeated by our sense of expectations, plan for the long haul, follow airline rules, I like to call it, where you take care of yourself and you keep yourself together, I think you'll be able to glue everything together much better. Knowing these various factors is how I would think about it.
Vidya, I think you bring up 2 points. One thing I always love as someone who got treatment for a plane phobia themselves during their early 20s is the oxygen mask metaphor for me. It's always funny because I completely agree with it. It's a great, organizing concept. You put the oxygen mask on yourself for your child, and that's how you live. But it also means the plane is in significant distress and that the oxygen masks have dropped. And so I was always sitting there thinking, like, I'd rather use a metaphor that involves self-care but doesn't involve the crisis, but it's so apt for the pandemic because it really is like the plane is in distress. And so you got to put, the oxygen mask. So I've circled back around now to being okay with that metaphor. But no, I mean, I think Vidya, you brought up 2 points, and this relates to kind of like how we can do pithy advice giving segments in the midst of our discussion here, which is, what I'd like to ask our panel here, and I can riff on this first to give you guys time to think, is one piece of advice for the parents who are pulled between their own work and their kids' online schooling and how they manage that. And then one piece of advice to be the second point about how one cares for yourselves. So I will say what I keep saying in almost every session to almost every parent, at least on those 2 points. Related to the parents who are working currently, thankfully some who can work from home may not have to leave the home for their job and they've got kids, attending online schooling. The main thing I've ended up talking to parents about as my kind of frontline piece of advice is the fact that they may be these incredibly capable people in their work life, pre-COVID, those kinds of things. That at best, they've got to think of themselves as working at 30% capacity during the pandemic. I don't care how talented you are. And so in that sense, like, even though we may know how good of a teacher we'd like to be for our child, the reality is that, like, if they're attending all day at school and you're attending all day at work, you get targeted moments to be effective. The rest of the time, you're just getting by. And so it's kind of like, how do we undermine the perfectionism that we're going with? The other thing that I give is kind of my frontline pointer for self-care for adults is I cannot say how many sessions I've had with adults during the pandemic in which someone is asking me for like some sort of complicated cognitive behavioral skill that they're going to use, and they're not sleeping, or they're not eating regularly, or they're not hydrating, or they haven't been out of the house in 4 days. And it's getting those things where if we don't engage in baseline wellness practices where we're at least trying to sleep and trying to eat at some regular schedule and trying to hydrate and trying to move our bodies in some way. I realize in the Bay Area with the wildfires during the pandemic, there was a moment where we couldn't even leave the house. Mm-hmm. But it's really like, mental health strategies don't work if people don't at least pay attention to those 4 things as a baseline. And that's kind of what I keep bringing people back to first and foremost. But who wants to go first on either advice for parents pulled between work and school or advice for parental self-care? Quick pointers.
I can start with the parent in school.
We could talk for an hour about this.
Oh my God, I know exactly.
But
I'm just trying to keep it to like that 1 point and see if we can keep going. But yeah.
I think with the advice between parent and school, I usually have parents think, there's all kinds of learning. School is one way, but life is a wonderful teacher. I encourage parents to think of this as a great opportunity to build problem-solving skills, flexibility, decision-making, the soft skills that every employer in the world looks for, that you can never pay enough money to buy or earn or learn, if you will. And this is a great opportunity. I've been encouraging lots of parents where think of your kids as working members of your household, engage them in household tasks, activities, things like that are very, very helpful in terms of even the smallest of kids, right? Even a 2-year-old can put clothes in a hamper. Even a 2-year-old can be taught to clean up their toys. I mean, these are things that we don't think about, and in a busy life are harder to do. But in the pandemic, it's possible because you're not commuting 2 hours a day. So there is time that is there. So you think of it as found time, if you will. I think this is a great opportunity to look at it as a collaborative opportunity to build a growth mindset where we learn from our mistakes. You look at every week as an opportunity and you basically say, we'll give our best shot this week. We'll look back at the weekend, we'll look at our wins, we'll look at our mistakes, and we will regroup, retool, and start the week over. And so that is a good way where you think of your kid as a partner and an active member of your household, as again, someone that you have to do things for. And I think even just that change in the way you approach it can change so much of the frustration and the burden of responsibility. But it also gives the child a feeling of being responsive, responsible. It improves self-esteem, and it gets them to think of them as pitching in. Even for the older teens who I see, and I also see young adults. So in that crew, I've even have parents who are, if because of various factors because of COVID related things or other things, cannot have the help or the resources they have, where the older kids are being paid to help the younger kids, or paid to tutor them, watch them, paid to do household chores or activities, because maybe someone can lend you a hand in scrubbing the bathroom. If taught well, kids can do that. They can be learned to do the laundry, and these are skills they keep even the pandemic is over. So that's how I think of, yes, I didn't talk about the education part of things, but there's lots of learning that is not directly book learning.
Yeah.
But what I think you're highlighting, though, that I found time concept so useful, and it had me thinking about my 4-year-old, because I didn't realize it, like, in the sense that I've become like this marketing machine for housework on weekends, where it's like, oh my God, Parker, I have got 6 laundries to do, 6, and we got to fold all of them, and we got to figure out some way to haul all the laundry onto a bed and then jump around in it or something like that. And it's like, my son on Sunday night told me as he was going to sleep that he's feeling sore because he was so helpful around the house. And this is a kid who, like, was freaking out if he didn't get the right granola bar at the beginning of the pandemic. So, like, I agree with you that it's one of these things where when you look at, some of the skills that kids are learning, if you could see it, and that's a really great cognitive pivot there, as found rather than lost time, and the opportunity to kind of learn new skills, and you set up something at the beginning as like, this is what we're going to try to learn or focus on. Again, not every week is as successful as it was on Sunday, but it's this question of, like, how you might be able to pivot that. So, Andrea, I want to give you a chance. What do you have on this parent coping?
I'm nodding my head away because I agree with everything you guys are saying. And Vidya, what I really liked, what you made me think about a lot, was also enlisting kids in chores, which might, we might not want to call chores, or activities and areas of growth. It also gives them a purpose, and it gives them something to do. I mean, I think this is such a tricky time, and it's tricky to answer their questions and follow their lead and try to answer these questions. And we don't know how long it's going to last. And we have like a moving finish line. It feels like a lot, by seasons or semesters or whatnot. But I think, for the school piece, I think it's really what I think both of you have really touched on is expectation. So we're not going to get, we're not, perfection and COVID don't mix. We know that. But when it comes to school, I mean, many days are like, what do we have to do to get, what are the important things we really have to get to? And what are these other things that would be nice, but it's just not going to happen. And I think juggling it, I mean, my husband and I talk constantly, like, we've gotten pretty good at working in like 10-minute intervals, which is not a great way to work, but where you can focus for 10 minutes and then, transition to your child or whatnot and take turns. And so I think, having your partnership, relying on your partnership, I think my biggest advice, it's hard to pick just one, Dave, but I would say my one self-care is probably exercise. And I would say, getting your heart rate up, moving your body, I think is like the number one thing that we can do for ourselves right now. And so I think what helps me personally and my peers and colleagues is when we are scheduling that time for ourselves, that's enriching our children. So it feels like we're taking away, I'm not available for the next 30 minutes, but it's making us better and more whole, which we have to be.
I will also say, on the point of exercise, my wife and I had this whole thing at the beginning of COVID where we would think about taking exercise time for ourselves. We now have a rule. You must take one of our 2 children with you for your exercise time. And we've come up with many inventive ways of doing it. Like, our youngest, our 1-year-old, will ride in the stroller for, outdoor stuff if you're going for a run. But, like, we just realized that, like, it may not be that pleasant, and that's okay. Like, our 4-year-old sometimes, he'll be excited about maybe playing with Legos while we're on the treadmill or doing some YouTube exercise class, for the beginning of it. But about 15 minutes in, he might be getting, not happy with it. And we just tell ourselves, like, It's okay for our kids to be unhappy for 15 minutes. Daddy's just going to keep running. And, you know, he's going to stand by the treadmill for a little while. And it's going to be a little bit dicey for a few minutes. But here, what I want to pivot to, at least for a moment here, and again, I'll do this kind of thing of answering my own question first to give the three of you time to think, since I want to tell you all, we came with a prepared list of questions and I've departed from all of them. So, you know, what I'll say is the other question I think I get asked a lot is, you know, how do you know if you should worry about your kid during the pandemic? Because none of us are doing that well right now. And by the way, Hannah and Christina, for those of you putting questions in the comments, great work, because in 8 minutes, we're going to stop and start answering those questions. And you will be first. So great job being at the first, the head of the line. But, you know, one thing that I get a lot is, you know, within this area, it's like, you know, everything is a little bit more difficult. How do you tell the difference between what's a little bit more difficult and what is really concerning, at least now? So what I answer related to child behavior is that what we expect in the midst of COVID is, you know, life not having as much structure means inevitably you're going to see these upticks in terms of, particularly with younger kids, you know, there may be more emotionality, there may be more tantrums, particularly if you don't have routines. There's a lot more kind of pushing against the boundaries, seeing what you're going to get, things like that. What I go back to with parents and behavior is a psychiatric acronym, FIDI, which is how we diagnose mental health and learning disorders. It's that I talk to people about the fact that we look at 4 criteria: how often something is happening, which is frequency; intensity, meaning how intense the experience actually is; how long it's been occurring; and then how much it's impairing. And the reality is that we're going to treat anything, especially if people answer yes to that last question. Doesn't necessarily mean it meets a diagnostic threshold. So my sidestepping way of answering that question is call us, because if it's stressing you out, it's likely to be something we could help with. And, you know, it may not mean that there's a diagnosis present. Like if someone calls up and says, I've got a 6-year-old who's having behavioral issues and they're screaming every night at dinner and it's actually making me want to pull my hair out. It may be circumscribed only to dinner, may not have happened anywhere beyond COVID. You know, it may not be that intense because it only lasts like 8 minutes, but it's excruciating and affects the entire evening and you spend the entire day dreading dinner. And it's this question of like, look, a quick consultation might be able to help make dinner a little bit better. But to be sure, with kids where parents are seeing it like, you know, it's happening frequently, you know, all day, it's been happening for, you know, longer than say a couple weeks, that often tends to be also the moment where we say then something else also could be going on in terms of a mental health issue. And that's where we really want to assess and kind of ask some questions. We can do that all remotely. So Andrea, Vidya, what do you answer when parents say, what should I look out for if I'm concerned about a teenager with depression or a kid with anxiety or something?
I think that's like the number one we're getting now too. Sorry, Vidya, I'll just jump in. But what comes to my mind, I think, Dave, you hit on the really important criteria we look at diagnostically, certainly. I think the lens that I try to talk with parents about is, what are you noticing? What is their behavior showing? Are there changes in eating? Is there changes in sleep, withdrawn, irritability, which can be tricky with a teenager? I mean, feel like most of my teenage parents are like, well, how do I know it's not just normal teenage irritability, you know, or is this COVID, or, you know, was it going on before COVID? So I think it's what I try to talk with parents about is really checking in, and especially with our teens. So this can be a quick little touch point. You know, it's not necessarily a one-time conversation and then you go a few months and then you have another conversation, but it's really paying attention and really monitoring for those changes. And I think, you know, it could be a minute or two check-in, just how are they doing? You know, a lot of families do roses and thorns at dinners as a way to kind of connect, you know, high point, low point. What's your bud is what I had heard the other day, which I love. Like, what is the thing you're looking forward to? What's the bud? But I think having that time together is so important. And I think how Vidya mentioned earlier, we know our kids the best. We're supposed to be kind of the expert on our kids if we're parents. So I think it's also good to really follow that instinct, like, something seems off. I just need to follow this through more. They're saying nothing's wrong, but I just need to push a tiny bit more to find out what's going on. So I think following that is really important.
No, I agree with everything both of you have said. The way I usually have people triage in themselves is, am I concerned about them functioning? Am I concerned about safety? Those are the two big ones. If either one of those questions is even a maybe, I think getting some professional in to at least have a conversation, even if you don't have your child see them, but at least for you to run your concerns by somebody and say, hey, this is what I'm noticing. How concerned should I be? How worried should I be? So that you're getting other people in. Obviously, like Andrea said, communication is key. And you want to have ways, depending on the age and stage of the child, the number of touch points you have will be different. So you want to match that with whatever is going on, periods of high stress, high need, high demand. If your child is differentiated in any way, neuroatypical, has various challenges that have been there pre-COVID, obviously those touch points will look very differently. So think of yourself as like the captain of that team who is kind of, taking the temperature all over the place to figure out what needs to happen. And I think that will kind of guide your path forward. One of the favorite points I like to say is, many of us, constantly adults, when we talk about pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, where we will land and what will happen and what life we will go back to. The thing we all need to remember is children won't go back to any life. Their life continues to march forward. Kids who were third graders are fourth graders. Someone who's 8 is now 9. Someone who's 17 is now 18. There is no going back. They go forward. That's how kids' life marches. So what happens is, as the pandemic has happened, their normal also has shifted and changed along the way. And that's very important to keep in mind. And because their development is progressing alongside the pandemic. And so they require a different lens and the way in which you look at them as compared to the way you would think about adults. They don't have a pre and a post.
Yeah. I'm reflecting on the fact that I think my 4-year-old has gone from age 4 to 9 during the pandemic. And, is currently considering what he's going to do when he gets his first apartment and maybe his car, just in the way that time has passed. But, so just pivoting or at least starting to pivot toward questions in terms of a last kind of thought before we go to the, question and answer portion of the evening. What's one kind of cool moment of resilience or creative way you've seen families, deal with the pandemic? Andrea, you were just talking about Rose and Thorn, which I think was one great suggestion. But yeah, what are the kind of creative things have you seen? Because I can see Hannah giving us, some positive feedback about life hacks. Hannah, also thank you for the picture of the dog in your picture. That makes me happy. But any other life hacks, creative success stories, moments of resilience you've seen from families you work with?
I actually remembered one earlier. I'll share that. I really loved it. I've never heard this before. I had this parent who is in the process of teaching her kids, because she has a job where she has meetings that she has to attend, and she's available at certain times and not available at certain times. And she's trying to get her elementary age kids to understand this concept of when is an okay interruptible moment on Zoom versus not. So what she has done is a combination of a do not disturb sign and a visual timer. So which is colored. So she actually sets the timer next to her thing, and it is so the kids are only allowed to interrupt when that timer is fully run down. So it's not blue anymore or green, whatever the color of the timer is. So the kid patiently, she sent me a picture where the kid is patiently waiting, sitting right next to it, waiting for the timer to be done so that she can ask a question, because that means mom's done talking, so mom can mute herself or get off camera. And I love that idea. And she has transitioned it to a do not disturb sign for quiet time in the family. So if she's in her room with the do not disturb sign out, her kids are supposed to wait till the sign's off to be able to interrupt. And she does 10-15 minutes of sanity time, if you will. Both of those were her ideas, and I've used it. I've basically shamelessly borrowed, and I'm freely distributing it.
I mean, I'm amazed at how well kids react to timers on average, just in that kind of thing. And it feels like you've rediscovered fire, because you think there's no way the kid's going to do this. And then it's like you set a 3-minute timer and the kid's like looking at it and waiting for it to count down. You're just going, wait, like a moment ago you were doing something else, and I was convinced this wasn't going to work. But I think that's a fantastic hack. Andrea, what were you going to say?
No, I was just saying that's where like teachers know this stuff already, right? Yeah. The structure, routine, and the rules, and especially for the elementary school. So rule-bound kids. I mean, I was thinking about, I struggled with this a lot as a parent during pandemic, and I vividly will always remember. So a week into telehealth, fortunately I was in a meeting and not with a patient. My 6-year-old urgently needed to talk to me and said, could I have pancakes tomorrow morning for breakfast? And I wanted to lose my mind because I was distracted. I thought it was an emergency. It clearly was not. But, I just remember struggling and continuing to struggle in various ways. And so, I just think we have to be flexible. I think one kind of, again, silver lining theme. I'm not usually so silver lining, but I'm feeling it right now. We're getting to also see, I can't tell you how many clients and appointments I have where I'm in their home, which is different, right? It's a very different kind of setting than in an office that's more sterile. I get to meet their pets. I might get to meet their baby sister, and I can share my pet, it's just creates this really thing that we wouldn't have had, before this. One thing I love hearing, I'll just mention lastly, is with families, just hearing about the joy and the things that they are looking forward to. So like, I had one parent talk about not only is she learning so much of what her kid is like in school or what in this kind of virtual setting, but her child is learning more about her mom's job, and her mom is this, and it's just kind of it creates conversations and experiences that I don't think we would have.
And my favorite hack, at least to the pandemic, are families who, I think I've had so many conversations, and again, you all can pepper us with questions if you'd like related to screen time, because I've had so many conversations about screen time during the pandemic, more than I ever had pre-COVID, even though that was already, an area of concern. But what I like is parents who marshal screen time into something positive for the family at the moment. They wait through the extinction burst. I'm talking like behaviorists now, which is that when you change circumstances, your kid's behavior often gets worse before it gets better. And if you can just wait through that period, you often see them adapt to that new normal. And this is also a metaphor for the entire talk we're giving tonight. But it's that, when I watch parents who, for example, declare that Tuesdays are screen-free nights for them and for their kids, and then what they do is they research online activities that you could do without screens, as if the 80s never happened. And we have to rediscover, board games and art and that kind of stuff. I have another family that they decide over the weekend that everyone has to watch something together, whether they like it or not, but they rotate the family member choosing the particular thing. And if you're not choosing, you get to choose the snacks, which at least gives you some agency and that kind of stuff. And then another thing I really like is a mom who told her 3 daughters, I will find you lessons online in anything, but you must always have a lesson in something. So like one of her daughters is learning a language, the other is learning an instrument, the other is learning to code. And it's like, she said, I'm going to find you cheap lessons online for something, but we got to be feeding your brain a little bit outside school. And of course, this is a great blessing for her sanity as well, because she schedules the lessons all at the same time. And, boom, it looks like brilliance. So I want to pivot to questions. So Christina, you're first in line. You asked a question about your 18-month-old. And you're taking social distancing very seriously. Your 18-month-old only gets to have rare play dates with other kiddos because you're all at varying comfort levels and risk tolerances, but is so social, shows all this interest in other kids, and you feel badly about it. And you're asking a question that is one of the most common questions. I'll tell you, it doesn't end with 18-month-olds. Biggest question we get about adolescents is, do I need to keep having them obey public health regulations, or do they feel left out? Are they going to miss out on teenagerdom? So let's talk about this question. At all age ranges, you can choose your age range for our panelists. How do you help parents weigh public health recommendations and socialization? Go. Oh, Andrea, you're shaking your head no.
It's so hard.
And Vidya was shaking her head yes. So I think we're going to go with Vidya first.
Okay. I'll start with the 18-month-old. The thing to remember is that even in places there's a lot of things you can do to support your child's socialization. So I would say that 2 things to remember. The pandemic is temporary. That is important to remember. And while your child is 18-month-old and is tuned towards other kids, there's lots of reciprocal social support that you can do for your child that does not require another playmate. You can be your child's playmate. A lot of what kids at that age do is you can provide mirroring, and you can provide, both in terms of language and in terms of play, and you can spur play along in ways that will improve a lot of the social skills that you're looking to gain by being among other children. Soon enough, your child will be around other children. And the other thing to remember at the same time is that all the other children from a play social kind of a standpoint will be in the same bucket that your child is. So your child will be neither behind nor forward. They'll just be right at the right place. And the interesting thing is, if it's a developmental milestone, quote unquote, that your child has already met, but could not achieve. I'm giving you an example. Say at this age, they're supposed to be able to do, with 18 months old, they can mirror each other, and they can, you can see what one child is doing, the other child will do the same thing. And if for some reason they were not able to do it at that particular point, the first opportunity they get, they will do it in double, triple, quadruple time, and they will be over it, and they will be jumping through their milestone hoops before you know it. We see this happen with kids who get a fracture in their leg around when they're supposed to walk. They just get out of the cast and go running. This kind of thing is not uncommon with children. So I would say, really, if your only concern is socialization, but you have other safety concerns, don't feel like you have to compromise on safety to make some of these developmental milestones work. Safety first and foremost is definitely an important factor to consider. That's how I would think about developmental milestones. And I do have some thoughts about teenagers, but I'll wait for Andrea to jump in.
I want to hit on two things. First of all, I'm going to use the cast metaphor at some point in the future, because that was a really good one related to the quick recovery. I mean, the thing is, what I think about with 18-month-olds is similar, just in the sense that a lot of the play is parallel play, not interactive. So it's not even as if they've reached the stage of play in which it's so dependent on a peer in order for it to be kind of facilitated. It's more that what we tell parents to think about in this kind of toddler age range right now is, what are the skills that are going to translate well when they do start interacting with toddlers again. So like for my 15-month-old, I'm sitting here thinking about her emotion regulation, her patience on things, and how she's trying to take turns with her much older brother, and the ways that she's showing me things, or the way that like she's doing or iterating with whatever I've just done, to go back to the mirroring that Vidya was mentioning. And the more that when I do take the playtime with her, I can kind of focus on reinforcing those skills, the more likely they are to translate. We can start having play dates again too. And I think to Vidya's point, we're on the same page, where when families are strictly social distancing, there's no compromise. If that's what you feel is safe for your family, if you have people who have vulnerable health conditions, the reality is that kids have developed throughout history without having a lot of contact with peers. And this is more a reflection of like perfectionistic parenting in this day and age, of like your kid's got to check off every box that could developmentally at all helpful. And at the same time, what I've said to many parents, and I realize this is a very morbid statement, but it is a lot worse for kids to see their primary caregiver either get sick and be unable to provide care, or to experience a death in the family, than it is for them not to have a play date with another 18-month-old. And that's where we kind of can't sacrifice the differential weight of those things developmentally. Andrea, do you want to take us to another developmental age range, or do you want to keep going on Christina's 18-month-old?
Well, yeah, I guess I could think of any age range. I think my head nodding, and it was as a parent, I think I'm constantly struck by making decisions where we normally didn't think about these kinds of decisions. And we all have different ideas of what's safe and what's not safe. And it's a time of, there's a lot of judgment, I think, in the parent community, and really trying to respect everyone's boundaries and comfort. But I think the things that I think a lot about are, kids are so flexible. So whether the cast, I love, suggestion, but they are going to learn these things quickly, and they're getting that exposure. So I think I had recently read an article, and it was for parents, and it was on decision fatigue. And I thought it was perfectly describing what many of us are feeling. We make the best decisions in the moment, what we think are safe, factoring in 12, 15 other things. So I think when there are opportunities to do it safely, fantastic. And there's other families there. I also think when we think of older kids and, what we're permitting them to do, I think it often comes down to like trusting our child, right? Do we trust our child? We might not trust the friends, but do we trust our child to, be around people who are only mask wearing and adhering to certain safety measures? So it's hard, it's tricky. But I think having that trust is really key.
Yeah. And before we pivot to the teenagers, I'll just say, related to, Andrea, what you're highlighting about trusting kids. One thing I've been amazed by in the pandemic, because I'll hit middle childhood here, is the number of questions we got around August when anything was starting to reopen. I think this was a common kind of theme across the country, where, maybe it wasn't that schools were reopening, but at some level, people felt safe enough with the COVID levels and they were fatigued enough the pandemic that they were kind of trying out a couple things. And people said, oh my God, there's no way kids are going to wear masks. There's no way they're going to adapt to adults wearing masks around them. There's no way that, they're still going to be able to be socialized. And it's been a complete just blip, in the sense that for those of us who've seen communities where kids have started to have contact with people who are mask wearing, the kids take their cues from adults seamlessly. There's not a lot of problems with it. My son's 4-year-old class is wearing masks most of the day while they're in preschool right now in their little pods. And it's really just whether or not the adults are doing it and they kind of adapt to the culture. In that sense, you'll see, I watched our 9 and 7-year-old next door neighbors run out of their house this morning to their school bus where they're going to half day in half school here in Connecticut. And, they forgot their face masks, and the bus driver merely closed the door of the bus and pointed back at their house. And they just, turned around and ran back into the house and grabbed their face masks and put them on and got on the bus. And it's they've adapted fairly easily to this when there was so much hand wringing about, how kids were going to continue to socialize in the midst of all these public health recommendations. So, okay, Vidya, to adolescence.
So I think my favorite comment about adolescence is that so much of adolescence is about risk taking. It's such an inherent, it's so much about independent decision making, and I'm going to learn by doing, because what do all these people know anyway? So I know better and I'm invincible. So that's the key. That's normal developmentally. I know we sometimes get annoyed by it, but it's just so normal. I think there are 3 words I like to use. I think the key, one of which Andrea already touched upon, is trust. You have to have a relationship of trust, but back that up by combination of communication through compromise and negotiation. That's really the key, that you have to find ways to allow them to do what they need to do in ways that you feel are comfortable and safe. I think that's the give and that's the take. And if you are willing to come to the table with that give and take, majority of the teenagers would, because they do know which side of the bread is buttered. They do know eventually you control things. So if they can work on building trust with you and building goodwill with you, there is good things to be had. So some of them, it is like what Andrea said, is safe socialization, whether it's that backyard get together where you get to watch a movie safe and socially distanced, or you get to have certain people that you are in a little pod with, where you say, among my 2,000 friends, I have these 2 friends I'm going to see because they follow the same safety regulations that I do. And I'm going to say that everybody else will be a remote friend, but these 2 are going to be my in-person, socially distanced meeting friends. Or the third one, which I've actually seen a fair number of teenagers do, is I've had some teenagers who cannot do all of those things, but basically say, you know what, I think I'm going to have to give up all this, even though I don't like it, but I think I'll settle for financial gain so that once all this is over, I'll make enough money in the next little bit that I'm going to have a party to beat all parties. So I've had some kids who are basically busy scurrying around the neighborhood making money, whether they're getting groceries for their elderly neighbors or whether it's tutoring the neighbor's child. I have this child who's basically got a list of jobs an arm's length long and has saved so much money that I don't know what that party is going to look like, but it's going to be a big one.
It makes me think of this teenager that I once treated. He was 14. And, it was back when I was living in LA and I was working mainly with foster and adoptive parents. And this kid had just been adopted. He was so excited about, his new life, and he'd just gotten his first allowance. And he went to school, he got up on a balcony over the cafeteria and he made it rain with his allowance, which means he sent $1 bills off of the balcony. And his moms took away his allowance for the next 3 months, but they did it laughing. They said, we can't, this is just who he is. He thinks this is, his opportunity to be a hip hop mogul, in the midst of getting his first allowance. And, we're just we're going to punish him, but we understand. Same way this kid apparently thinks he's going to have the bash to end all bashes, at the end of COVID, which is great. The one thing I'll say on teenagers too is on that note of the pods is that, I've had a couple conversations with teenagers as they're trying to figure out, how they can engage in this kind of collaborative problem solving with their, friend group, where, we'll say you're about to try to figure out your pod, but you can't include everybody in the friend group. And at the same time, who you include is now your friend until we've got a vaccine that's equitably distributed. So there's no like little tiffs you can have. Like, we're going to work everything out. You're in a relationship. It's like your roommate's signing a lease. And like, we'll try to figure out with the teen, like, how they can make intelligent choices about who they know isn't a volatile friend, isn't going to say like, we're not going to see each other, because this could really have an impact on their mood. So Colleen's directing our attention to one question that I think we want to make sure we answer with Hannah, which relates to an earlier point we were making, which is just, my daughter has assumed a more mature personality as well. Is that common? Which is, reflecting on my comment about my 4-year-old. It's interesting, because the thing I think about, because I brought up that point, is that, to go back to Vidya's point, which I think we were riffing on in that moment, was this idea that there's found time and kids can learn new skills and new independence in that time. Of course, there's also the fact that we want to still allow them to be a kid. And we still want to make sure that they're doing the stuff that's messy and that involves them making mistakes and that involves them not being at all mature. So in that sense, it's even the type of stuff, and I'm often, this is my partner who reminds me of this, where our 4-year-old will do what a 4-year-old would normally do. And she will say to me very quickly, as a coping thought, he's 4. And that reminds me not to expect as much of him as I think I perhaps should, given his more mature functioning in other areas. But do you guys have any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, when they are learning a lot of skills and strengths, I think it makes me think about my 11-year-old is often being called in as the third parent at times to help with the younger sibling, right? And I try to praise it, and his currency is Robux, so if he's extra helpful, he might earn Robux to for games and stuff. But I see it as adaptive, and I see it as something to really kind of strengthen. Like, you've really stepped up. I'm so proud of you, and really focusing on giving some really solid positive feedback about it. I want to mention too something for teenagers, and this is true, disappointment is, we know it's happening. We're all disappointed with various things. Our kids are disappointed. And I think one big take home is really listening and hearing them and leading with a lot of validation. They might be disappointed because, yes, they can't go and do some social activity, which we don't feel is safe. And it's okay for them to be disappointed. So I think also that, that parental guilt that comes in, I think following your parental gut and instincts around safety and all that, but also leading heavily with validation. Like, this is hard and it's not forever. And I think it's so important to just lead, end with hope, not, Pollyanna stuff, but just give them hope that this is not forever. One last minor random thought too is, I see this a lot with my younger one. His sense of time is not like ours, right? He thinks it's been years of COVID and doing school from home. It feels like that at times. But, when he transitions back to school, whenever that can happen, then, that will be his new thing. And I like what you said earlier about forward thinking and forward moving, because that is how our kids grow.
Yeah.
Did you have any last point to bring us home?
The one last thing I would add is, going back to Hannah's point, I think of this as, again, a great opportunity for the seesaw, the teeter-totter. If your child is that way, the thing you can do is to mirror that inner child for them. It brings out the child in you, which we all can use a little bit of too, to bring out that playful, fun side of things, and letting them know and leading by example to know that it's okay to have fun too, right? Because they think that they're following your example by being mature and planful and rule oriented. And when you lead by saying, what, we can all let our hair down sometimes and you do something fun and crazy and silly, then they're like, oh, this is okay too. I know, so there's so much that we can do as parents in those kinds of ways, and you lead by those kinds of examples. So I think that's another one to catch and kind of hold on to as well.
That is a great last point. I'm going to take that one with me, Vidya. It's a rare that I start a day not thinking like, so what do I got to get done today? It's, that kind of stuff. But look, so Bara, I think we're going to end with your piece, which is thank you all for joining us tonight. You can absolutely stay in touch with us. As I think it was Colleen posted at the beginning of this chat, you can see our websites there, childmind.org for Andrea and me, CHC Online for Vidya. We of course, have all of our different kind of resources on our website. CHC has free talks, parent support groups, and telehealth. as well as all the other kinds of things that Vidya mentioned. We have telehealth, as well as all kinds of intensive and online services as well, parent talks as well. But it's the bottom line is that both organizations are just trying to provide as much help as we possibly can. And the true reason why we can all work together is because we're not serving all the people who need us in a time like this. So it's, there's still so much more work to do. And with that said as well, Vera, I'm sure that Colleen, also, if you're looking to reach out to one of us specifically, can give you our email addresses or help you to connect with us, about any specific concerns. Or LinkedIn, we're all on there, I think, right? Everybody? No? Vidya's not. So, you gotta send her an invite, but or you can find us in some of those. Apparently, Vidya, you're getting recommendations.
Get on Vidya.
Colleen's reminding us. Colleen, do you have anything else you want to say in closing tonight?
No, thank you so much for that talk. I think it was so helpful and reassuring for people who are parents, who have young kids in their lives. I always get struck by the fact that like time feels so different right now in what we're living in. And so it's important to remember that that's universal, no matter what age. And so to adapt and keep that in mind. But thank you all so much. We will share this recording with everybody who RSVP'd tomorrow or the following day. So feel free to share it with your network as well if you think someone would benefit from watching it. And if you do want to connect with any of our panelists, feel free to reach out to memberevents@thebatterysf.com, and I'd be happy to help facilitate an introduction. But thank you again, Vidya, Andrea, and Dave, for leading us in this great conversation.
Thank
You all.
Yeah.
Have a happy holiday.
Yes, happy holidays.
Thanksgiving to all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.